Welcome everyone to another episode of Caster Calls with ZombieGrub. This time on the show with Achilios, who is, known for a lot of things at this point. Actually, I guess most recently Overwatch and Valorant. Right, so very established commentator living out in Korea and doing a lot of the Korean league. So thank you so much for coming on. We
No
met
problem.
and really enjoyed talking to you about some of the stuff, the inner workings of the job, and I'm so happy to have you on.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure. It was great to hang out last time you were out here for the Frost Giant event and everything.
Yeah.
So naturally, you asked me to come on the show. I got it. Yeah, of course, I'm going to do it.
Nice. Oh, so thank you. It's usually an hour, sometimes push to an hour and a half. Even though I think that all of my guests so far have enjoyed talking about the thing that they've ding for the last decade, thing that was born basically out of passion. I still very much appreciate it. But I actually don't know much about your initial career, I suppose. So how did you get into esports? What was your first esports gig?
Oh boy. Technically, it would have been. There was this really small tournament for anybody who remembers. Like, I never knew if it was like owned TV. I assume it's just pronounced owned TV, but OWN with the 3D.TV. Former rival of Twitch and everything like that. Um, I had a friend named Zyori who was then a commentator for Heroes of Newerth. And I met him at PAX East just kind of randomly through mutual friends. We found out that we went to the same university. He said, "Hey, your voice would do well for commentary. Have you ever considered trying to cast, League of Legends?" Because I was really big in League at the time. And I said, "No, that never really crossed my mind. I enjoy listening to the casters at that point. That would have been D-Man Joe Miller, Jat, Riv is kind of like um, the biggest casters, the biggest voices in the scene at that time. Loved listening to him. Never once considered doing it myself. But he said, well, here's a new Earth. The future for this game is a little questionable. So I'm looking to get into League of Legends. How about you teach me League and I'll teach you how to cast? And I said, sure, whatever. Why not? And he got us a gig for some tournament with Own TV. And we cast a single day. And then the tournament got canceled, and this is when Own TV started going into the shitter, and they owed people a bunch of money, and kind of had to file for bankruptcy or whatever happened. I don't know. I never really followed the specific details of what exactly occurred, but I only had one day that I cast, and I enjoyed it a lot. Even though it was just like 3 hours the first time that I ever attempted it, and it was, I don't even want to go back and try to find it because it's probably got awful. But I remember really enjoying it in that moment. So I was like, okay, what are other ways that I can, continue to do this as a hobby, because I didn't see it as any potential career at that time. It's just something that I wanted to do with my free time, and I had a hell of a lot of free time. So I reached out to some like weekly tournaments that were running just on Twitch. These people that would just put on leagues with like gold, silver players, maybe as high as plat, and you'd get these squads together. You just every single week go in and you would win like RP, riot points, so you could buy skins, and that was it. And I would just go and I would cast that stuff for free, and then just continue to enjoy it. And then steadily, more and more opportunities came along, and eventually I got my first ever paid gig, which it wasn't even supposed to be a paid gig. There was a land center, the last land center in New Jersey where I grew up. The last one in the entire state ran a League of Legends tournament. They posted on Facebook saying they're looking for casters. I said, I'll do it. I drove 2.5 hours from South Jersey all the way up just outside of New York to a small town called Fort Lee, and sat there and cast through like 14 hours of technical difficulties because the Riot servers went down, but did the whole thing expecting not to get paid whatsoever. And then at the end of the day, they're like, that was too brutal. We have to cut you a check. We can only give you like $150. Is that cool? And I said, yeah, I wasn't expecting anything. So this is amazing. It's the first time I ever got paid. And then from there, just kind of continue to find things where it's like, $10 a map or, $20 a day, that kind of stuff. And that's just kind of where I got my start. And it fortunately blossomed into something a bit more stable, with a bit more reasonable pay metrics and everything involved. And here we are.
Yeah. At some point, you made the big move to Korea. When did that happen?
So that was right at the end of 2015. I had done I was going to say small tournament, actually quite large, but randomly had gotten asked by Twitch to fly out to Taiwan and cast the then LMS regions summer and regional finals for League of Legends. So these are the tournaments that basically decided which two teams from the LMS region were going to be going to the World Championship at the end of the year. So of course I was ecstatic about that. Flew out to Taiwan. It's the first time that I ever left the country. So went and got to see Taipei and then Kaohsiung, the southern capital. Beautiful country. Ate a lot of food that I never thought I would have tried and whatnot. And because of that event, eventually I got seen by Monte Cristo, and I got to meet Monte Cristo when I went to the World Championship in Paris alongside Cloud9 because I used to work in videography and esports. So I was filming the team doing a docu-series on them. Ran into Monte Cristo. He said, "Oh, I saw your casting. You're pretty good." It's like, "Oh, thank you so much." That's in October, November. Fast forward to December, I was just out at a karaoke bar alone, sad because I was like, oh god, my job is, I'm working brutal hours editing videos nonstop, and I don't make a ton of money and whatnot. So I was just like, I'm gonna go to the bar. And I remember sitting at the bar, and all of a sudden my phone rings, and I look, and I have a Twitter DM from Monte Cristo, and he just said, how do you feel about moving to Korea and casting the LCK? And it was just a no-brainer. I was like, no regard for my then coworkers or my family or anything. I was just like, 100% have to do this. There's no doubt in my mind. Nothing to make me second guess it whatsoever. I just said yes, absolutely. And then it just fortunately progressed from there. So 2.5 months later, February 24th, I want to say, I still remember the day, I flew out here and landed in Korea.
Yeah, that's a pretty big jump then, what it sounds like, right? I don't
A
know
massive one.
yeah, I don't know what the equivalent would
Yeah.
be for StarCraft, for instance, but yeah, it sounds like you went from doing I don't, like a lot of side gigs, I don't know, B streams even, just
Yeah,
to getting right up to
pretty much.
the A stream. Yeah, so how was that first cast then? Like, how was dealing with I must imagine incredible amount of stress.
It was completely and utterly nerve-wracking because one of the things that Monty made sure to really drill into my head, even before I got on the plane and had gotten out here, was you need to be good enough, because if you come out here and you suck, you'll go home. Like, we won't keep you around. We're not going to work with somebody who doesn't want to work hard, doesn't put in the hours, isn't, researching and isn't delivering the quality of product that we like to have, on OGN, because at that time you're fucking working on OGN. It's the company that basically created esports, and started the whole thing, and was the first company to really turn esports players into countrywide known superstars. So there's a whole lot of pressure. So he made sure to really hammer that home, and that made me so incredibly nervous, because I was like, how many strikes do I get? Like, are they gonna give me like a certain amount of fuck ups? Are they gonna test me for like the whole split? And then if I'm not good by the end of spring split, then I leave and they get somebody else for summer. Like, I was just panicking. But I remember casting with Papa Smithy. It was my first cast. And even though, I was in the play-by-play role, he was like, I'll take the hosting role. I'll introduce it, because you need to
Mhm.
learn the timings and whatnot. Because, I'm sure you're well aware of this, but for some of the viewers, they might not. Like, when we are here in Korea, a lot of times we don't get cues from production. When I worked at
Mhm.
OGN, I never got cues for anything. I get cues with Valorant work, and then my Overwatch stuff, that's with an English production staff. But when I worked with OGN, never really got cues. So when a graphic's coming up, when you're going into game, when they're ready to throw to an interview, that is not something that people tell you is about to happen. It's a feeling, and it's memorization as well, because you follow the Korean casters, so you have to get used to their cadence, their flow of show, as well as the camera shots, the lighting cues, the music, and everything. And then you basically just memorize and feel your way through those broadcasts. So he was obviously way more familiar with it. I had done an immense amount of research, kind of coming in, taking all of these notes on, players' pick rates and win rates and all of this kind of stuff, like just trying to figure out the scene. Because prior to the offer, I didn't pay the closest attention to Korea just because of time zone stuff. So, but I didn't really consider trying to learn the show flow as much when I was doing my research. So luckily, he guided me through that. I just did my play-by-playing when we were in game, and I think by the end of the second series, I kind of had a rough idea of it, and I think if I'm remembering correctly, I think I hosted that second series, because I was like, okay, no, like, I want to do it now. I think I got it. But once I got through that, it was just like a weight had been lifted. I still wasn't like particularly ecstatic about how I did, but I think for the pressure that I was feeling, I think I did a perfectly adequate job.
It's better than bad.
Yes.
Yeah. So, you bring up that you didn't really know the Korean kind of, you weren't given to run a show, Korean production. Up to that point, had you actually done any amount of hosting or leading? Like, has there been like a big production that you had
Yeah.
done before?
The biggest thing up until that point would have been the LMS, and then we also did one of the other things, I guess, that kind of like had me a little bit more out there on Monty's radar was a challengers tournament that we ran while I was working with Team Liquid.
Mm.
So we brought in, because this was before academy teams and whatnot. So there was just organizations that had, challengers level players that weren't a part of the LCS. They would compete in challenger circuits. Companies like Alpha Draft and whatnot always used to run these different things, but we ran one with HGC sponsoring it. So I hosted that event. It was about a week long. And then when we did the LMS broadcasts, I was casting with Dracos, who's one of the he's from North America, but he works in the LEC broadcast for League of Legends. And at the time he was an analyst. So I was the host kind of for those things. But prior to that, it was pretty much just only the online gigs that I had done in my house, which I won't count whatsoever.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I think other esports, especially more recent esports, I feel like there's a lot more. I talk to a lot more people that seem new. Um, and then, ask them about the previous experience. They'll be like, yeah, I actually got flown out to this and I got to do that and like a big production. And I'll be like, really? Because in StarCraft, it's like if you're not literally a stream flown out to the big events, you're not really getting that experience. So
Mhm.
it's always fascinating to hear the other ones where it seems like there's a little more of a ladder, not just a huge gap in the rungs. But
Yeah.
yeah, you get there. You do an adequate job, as you say. Was there any feedback process? How was the casting group in Korea?
We were, and I'd say we still are, as far as the amount of people who are here now, because there's even more of us these days. Because I guess it's kind of roughly the same number actually. But Monty and Doa, they had left, but before, like when they were still here, we were so tight knit. After every broadcast, whether you're working that day or not, because there's no trading off as well with Korean work days. You don't go in and do the first series and then another casting pair goes into the other, does the other one. Like, if you got two best of threes, you're casting potentially all 6 maps if it goes that way. But we all lived basically on the same street. So like I could throw a baseball to the furthest house, which was where Doa lived, and then Monty was in between with living with Susie. Papa Smithy was just on the opposite side. So we were all so very close together, constantly just going out, getting dinner, lunch, whatever it is, getting drinks. To be like, oh yeah, we're on the way back from the studio. Does anyone want to go to whatever bar and get some drinks and talk about the matches? They'd come out of their apartments, come down, meet us. We all hang out for a couple hours, go to bed, wake up, do it all again the next day. So getting feedback, it was very honest and easy, which is great. Because like I said, that they want somebody who's going to be competent, who's going to do a good job, that they don't have to kind of carry through broadcasts. So they would be brutally honest if I had made any mistakes, fucked something up, said something that was even slightly incorrect. They're willing to just openly critique that and point out the mistake so that it gets fixed. And that goes both ways, because even though I'm like the young gun who is like coming in and first like real casting gig, like first time making a career out of it, they didn't think like, well, we're so much better that you cannot possibly give feedback to us. So like if I had to point something out, it was just welcomed. So it was just really great communication. And I think that still carries over, even though Monty, Doa, Papa Smithy, everybody who was here when I got out here on the League of Legends side is gone. Still having people like, Valdez, Wolf, who are now working on the LCK. We brought over Atlas, Chronicler, from the Netherlands, and then of course, like, Nick and Dan are out here, and then we've added Paper Thin, who's my co-caster for Valorant. So we've kind of kept a similar amount of people, and we're all still incredibly good friends who can have these open conversations with each other. If we say like, I think the way that you handled that team fight was a little wonky. I think you should have done this, and like we can just kind of shoot the shit about it in that regard. So it's still excellent.
Sounds like an awesome group. Yeah. One thing I've heard from the other League of Legends scenes is that there's quite a bit more of I don't know, a behind the scenes process. For a lot of esports, it is do your own work and show up on the day of the broadcast and cast. But there's a few broadcasts that are fortunate enough that they can have like meetings and they can kind of help with the direction of like the media and storylines. And where does Korea sit in that? And how much does it differ between all the esports, I guess?
None of that at all. Pretty much, at least not in my experience. You might have a meeting at the beginning of a season, but that's typically going to be for if you're doing any kind of negotiations. If there's a massive change in the structure of the tournament and they want to like sit you down and kind of like go through like this is how this is going to happen. But widely in my experience, like there's so little communication, and I think that that's great. I know that a lot of people are going to hear me saying like there's such a lack of communication, probably be like, ooh, like Korea doesn't sound like the best place to work. I fucking love and thrive in the lack of communication when it comes down to my work. I remember just one of the biggest events that I have done, period, just for the sheer scale of it and everything that was going on, was the season 3 Apex Overwatch tournament that we had done out here at the base of Lotte Tower, which is I think now like the 4th or 5th largest building in the world. You're right next to the river. There's all of these crowds split up, different screens that they're watching, massive stage, all outdoors and everything. And I just showed up on that day. Like I just arrived a couple hours before the broadcast. They gave me my clothes. I got hair and makeup done. And then they said like, okay, yeah, like the announcer's going to say your names. And then you guys just like walk out on stage, wave, and then go sit down and do the whole show. Like that's it. It's just like, okay, cool. It's so simple. It's so easy because it's not overly complex. The broadcast itself, like those are such simple instructions to be able to follow. Like I don't need somebody to sit down and be like, and then this graphic's going to come up, and then this thing is going to happen, and then we're going to roll this video, and blah 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 blah. It's like just put it on the screen, and I will react to it. Is the way that I like to do it, and that's how it was with OGN the whole time. When I joined the Overwatch League and went out and lived in LA for 9 months or whatever it was in 2019, the first meeting that I had with our head producer, Nick Visker, who's still there, and I love him to death. He's one of the best producers that I've ever worked with. I told him like the smallest amount of communication that you can give me in my ear is better. Like the least you talk to me, the better the show flow is going to go, the more I will be able to stay on track with what I'm talking about. As if you just throw a graphic in front of us, like myself and Wolf, who was my co-caster at the time, like we will react to it. We will change topics and start focusing on that. Like you don't have to wait for us to cue it. You're the one who has the show flow kind of in mind. If you think that we're dragging, instead of just trying to get me to break a conversation or whatever by talking in my ear, just throw it on the screen and we'll go for it. And luckily he very much kind of conformed to that for me specifically, and for Wolf as well. And it's great. So I love that stuff. And that's why I love working in Korea.
Nice. It works out. Is there any like, when you go to an event, and I'm sure you've had this happen when you go to other events outside of Korea, but there's like the rehearsal day and there's the media
Sure.
day.
Yeah.
And there might even be, a director who wants to like debrief after the show. Any of that, like, are there even rehearsals in Korea? Do you participate in the media days?
I've done. So when the Overwatch League first started and then Contenders kicked off in Korea, because I wasn't a part of the Overwatch League for the first season. So Wolf and I were casting Contenders out here. There was a media day with a bunch of team representatives. They introduced like who the casters were going to be for the Korean and the English side. I did that media day. And then I think we did one rehearsal day that Wolf wasn't even able to make it to because I think he was casting either Heroes of the Storm or Brood War that day. So I went solo to the venue to figure out like what the show flow was going to look like and do this rehearsal, and then basically sat around for an eternity. And then they're just like, when we finally did it, I was like, okay, it's exactly the same show flow as like every other Korean broadcast, basically. Like some swooping shots of the stage,
Mhm.
close up on this thing, and then on the logo, and then it cuts to us on camera. Like, it's fine. And I just told Wolf that, and then we did the broadcast the very next day. But I, other than that, no. Like,
Yeah.
I've never really been a part of any rehearsals out here. I think that they wisely, Korean companies, I think they find them to be mostly unnecessary because they know that they're working with professionals both on the Korean and the English side of things, and that it's not necessary to have to bring somebody in for an extra day, because they also, then they'd also don't want to probably get into the conversation of being like, well, now we have to pay them for coming in for a rehearsal or blah blah blah. They just want you to be able to show up and do your job properly on the actual day. Unfortunately, everybody who's working out here is capable of doing that.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the longtime professionals are capable of doing that. Yet the standard
Yeah.
still is, at least a rehearsal day, if not for other esports, also like participating in a couple of the media days. So it's weird. We went from 2017 doing the 12-hour rehearsal days where like they just didn't do anything.
Hmm.
Yeah, and then they were like, the thing that you did do is you went up on the stage, you basically mic checked for them, and then you left, and you're like, well, did we really have to be here?
Yeah.
And that's been like a conversation I think being had even currently for a lot of these esports events. So it's a question if it really is worth it. But I understand that sometimes the producers say that it makes them feel a lot more comfortable, and I'm like, okay, like I kind of get it, I guess. But
Yeah.
anyways, sounds like I would like the Korean style better. But all right, so you're kind of just doing your own thing. You've probably figured out a very good system for you to I guess learn and adapt and study and actually get kind of ingrained into the scene. And then Overwatch also happens, as you were just talking about. So the second season of Overwatch, which I don't 2017, 2018.
2018 would be the first, and then 2019 was the second
Oh
season
wow,
of the
really?
Overwatch League.
Oh my gosh, my timeline is so far off. I was like going off of like the date of announcement for Overwatch, I guess, and then
Right, yeah,
that makes
because it
sense.
came
Two
out in
2 years.
2016.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that does make sense actually. But anyways, so you joined in for the second season. Was that your first time going into another esport besides League of Legends, or were you already kind of dipping into other stuff?
Well, so I mean, at that point of joining the Overwatch League, I'd been casting Overwatch for about
Right,
2
right,
years.
right.
Because when Apex started, that was Monty and Doa. I mean, they had put it in their contracts with OGN at the beginning of 2017, like when Overwatch comes out, or 2016 even. When Overwatch comes out, they wanted to be able to cast it because they knew that it was going to be this game that had, it has an immense amount of potential to be able to blow up and whatnot, and be this really big force in the esports scene. So they wanted first dibs on it. And at that time, I mean, they were basically already communicating with Blizzard as well as far as planning the Overwatch League. So they were so far in advance. But I, of course, I've been a Blizzard game, fanboy for a very, very long time. I think when I was about maybe 7 or 8 years old, I played Diablo 2 for the first time, which is definitely not an age that somebody should be playing that game at. But I fell in love with it. I ended up getting it for my birthday. I played so many hours of it. It's like I've been a big Blizzard fan for eternity. I'm still playing World of Warcraft, 16 years later, whatever it is at this point. If not more than that. I don't even know. I'm losing track of time in that regard. So, knowing that there's this FPS game coming out made by Blizzard, my favorite game company, I was like, I need to get involved in this somehow. So I basically had secondary dibs on Overwatch. So if Monty and Doa couldn't make it for a day, I'd fill in. I did a couple of the kind of like relegation tournaments that they had in between the actual Apex seasons, but didn't really get to fully dive in until Apex Season 3 in 2017, because then Monty and Doa were stepping away. They had already left the LCK, and they were moving to North America to go to the Overwatch League at the beginning of 2018. So that's kind of when I got in there, and I was casting with Papa Smithy and with Wolf. We also had Atlas at the time was working Overwatch as well. So that was kind of the first big excursion of casting another game. Like, I've done some one-off days of like Heroes of the Storm. Like, I think I actually cast a day of Heroes of the Storm before I even cast League of Legends, if I'm remembering correctly, because I had just gone out to Korea and Wolf had to miss because I think he was going to maybe like IEM Katowice or something. I don't remember. Either way, I had to cast. I remember casting with Artosis, and that was like the first time that I'd ever worked with him. So we did Heroes of the Storm together. I've done some other like one-off, like minor game, like Point Blank, which is kind of like a CS 1.6, copycat
Hmm.
game here in Southeast Asia. But yeah, that Apex Season 3 was kind of the first time that I really had to jump into a brand new game, and it was very scary. Because the first time that I did ever cast it was at I Am Gyeonggi, and I remember casting that with Mitch Uber Leslie, who is still one of my coworkers and colleagues at the Overwatch League right now. Um, and I cast alongside him. He was my analyst, and I remember coming out of that first map and being like, "I am utter dog shit at this. Like, this game is so fucking hard to cast. Like, I think this is it. Like, I'm gonna work these 2 days of IEM, and then I'm never going to get to cast Overwatch again because that was so fucking awful from me." Um, and I've told everybody who is ever, like, before they started casting Overwatch for the first time, I've told them they are going to feel the exact same way. I said this to Papa Smithy, I said this to Wolf, and they said, "You know what, you were completely correct. You get through that first map, you feel so down on yourself, and then you start the next one, and it's like a switch goes off, and suddenly like your third eye opens, you start seeing everything that's going on in the game, and you're catching all of these things and details that you missed the first time around, and you're like, why was I panicking? Like, this is actually so simple now." It's just you have to get through that initial panic. It's like running a marathon. You have to break through the wall, and then once you do that, you're able to coast through to the finish line, no problem. But yeah, like it was a terrifying start. But obviously a plunge that I'm very grateful that I took.
Yeah. Well, did you? I think Overwatch League is or Overwatch, sorry, the game is just it is incredibly hard to cast. I only gave it one go, so I'm not speaking from experience. But everyone I've ever
Mm.
talked to
Like I said,
says
you gotta
it's
give it that second try. That's when it comes together. It
yeah.
gets easier.
Should have done the second one, but it sounds incredibly difficult. It certainly is an incredible difficult one to watch if you really are
Sure.
trying to kind of just dive in immediately and play the game type of situation. Uh, did you find anything that you could bring over from your League of Legends commentary? Because while I think I want to say Overwatch League, Overwatch is its own very fast paced game. I mean, League of
Yeah.
Legends kind of has its moments, right? Like those team fights can have a lot and be over very quickly.
Yeah. Honestly, I think that the biggest thing that I brought over from casting League of Legends was just being able to chat through pauses.
Okay.
Learning how to get through a really long tech issue. Because there was a time when I was casting with Monte Cristo. We were in this tiny ass room because this is at a weird point in League of Legends history when Riot gave the broadcast rights to OGN and to SPO TV simultaneously. But when SPO TV was producing, when either broadcast was going on, the other one also had their own broadcast. So basically, like, SPO TV would be running a League of Legends broadcast that no one would watch, and then because the teams weren't at the venue, we were put in a very small like recording room with a tiny table and a couple monitors, and we had to do a piggyback broadcast. So when there's tech issues, it's entirely on the other production company's staff to figure it out. Um, and they don't necessarily have to tell you what the problem is either. All we knew was that they were working on some issues. So Monty and I were stuck there, and we were in a pause for about an hour and 45 minutes. And this is the one downside, I guess, to Korean production strategies. And they're getting better about it now. But oftentimes when you have these really long pauses, they do not cut away to a break because they don't know, especially when you're piggybacking off somebody else's broadcast, they don't want to put a timer on screen and then have the issue be fixed and then
Hmm.
have the game start and then suddenly have to, jump back into it. So they basically just keep you on camera at all times so that you are ready at any moment for when the issue is taken care of. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that I brought over from League of Legends. Because like you said, they're so different in their styles, like especially Korean League of Legends during that era. It was much more methodical and like playing chess. This was tower swap meta and lane swap meta and whatnot out here. So you probably wouldn't even get like kills until like 15-20 minutes into a game, and then it might end 10 minutes later with one team fight. So there wasn't a ton of action, so it was very much about like filling downtime. So between just the slow commentary of the games and whatnot, and then that pause that I went through, Going into any pauses that I have on the Overwatch League side, which this season pretty good. In the past, had some catastrophic ones. Um, I've been able to, alongside Wolf and now Avril, who's my current co-caster, we've been able to kind of, keep the energy up and keep things interesting and entertaining for the audience
Mhm.
during those down moments.
And on that subject, sounds like now you're a pro at it. Do you have any advice for people who are like, gosh, I hate that downtime? If there's like a minute, I'm already panicking.
It's, I'd say that if you have a thought, as long as it's not, like gonna get you in trouble, I should say. But basically, like if you just have a thought or a topic, you just have to go into it. You just pose it to your co-caster, and ideally your co-caster just rolls with it. You kind of have to treat. I mean, it literally is improvising. But you have to treat it like you're doing an improv class, because the first rule of improv is that you don't say no.
Mhm.
So if somebody decides to take a scene in a certain direction, you go with it, because it breaks down the flow of the scene and it takes the audience and also the actors out of it. If somebody says like, I don't like your idea, basically, and they want to go against, what the other person is trying to improvise. So you always just say yes and you go with it. So like if I say like to Wolf randomly, at the time, I remember we started talking about the movie The Page Master for like a half hour, because we had this incredibly long, like 2 hour pause the one time. And we just talked about the Page Master, talked about like Christopher Lloyd, Macaulay Culkin, and all of this shit. And that was just like a thing that was in my brain because I had watched the movie a week prior to this pause. So it just popped into my head. I was just like, oh, let's talk about this movie. Have you seen it? And then we just go on a tangent from there. Like you just have to be able to throw ideas out as soon as they enter your brain. That pause that I was in with Monte Cristo, he just randomly had the idea that we were going to open up our laptops, look at Twitch chat, and do an AMA, and then we played Hangman with the Twitch chat, because it's just like that just comes to his brain, and he's like, let's do this. And I'm like, cool, absolutely. And people were, while they were obviously the people who were saying like, why the fuck isn't the game starting, widely, like no one overall was asking what was going on with the game. They were just enthralled with the conversation and with everything that was going on. So I think we did a damn good job of keeping everybody entertained. And you just have to be loose and willing to just jump on any topic that you or your co-caster comes up with.
Right.
So that's what I would say. Don't say no.
Yeah, the yes and game is the
Yes,
improvising
precisely.
game. I'm just curious as to why you're watching The Page Master, as a fully grown adult.
That's just one of those movies that I remembered loving. And I looked at like some reviews of it and I was like, surely no. Cause I think it was like middling. And I was like,
Yeah.
this movie was like when I was a kid, like this movie was like a 10 out of 10. Like it can't be that bad. So I watched it back and I was like, it's still actually kind of really fucking good. So I still do love that movie.
Fair
But yeah, it was
enough.
just wanted to make sure that young me wasn't an idiot with
True.
bad movie taste.
Yeah. I have tried watching, those old movies again. Like Hook has like bad
Oh yeah.
reviews, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
I still love it. I'll absolutely still watch it.
It's a complete and utter classic.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so Overwatch starts to work out for you really well. You become kind of a standard in the scene for sure. And then Overwatch, I guess, kind of has its ups and downs as far as the production goes, which maybe we'll get into in a different topic. But kind of move on to your next game, which I guess your current game, which is
Mm.
Valorant. So Valorant comes along, and I think that people have the same expectation they did, kind of like when Heroes came out. Certainly, when Overwatch came out, as you were talking about, like it's going to be big, it's going to be invested into.
Yeah.
How did that work out in Korea? Now, Korean English commentators, there's not that many of them. So, is there kind of like a first dib system? Is it just kind of natural that you would do these new big esports, or were you specifically interested in it?
It's definitely one that I was specifically interested in, both just from a curiosity standpoint and seeing how Riot, who had previously not really released any other games other than League of Legends, how they were going to handle making an FPS. I knew a lot of the names that were behind it, as far as like former like CS:GO map creators and whatnot that they had hired to come into the game and help design the maps and whatnot. So I was like, well, it seems like they're making the right decisions. I just need to see a little bit more of it. We got like a minor trailer that kind of showed off, Jet being able to dash, and that was about it. And then suddenly it just kind of felt like the beta came out and was just there. So when the beta launched, of course, I reached out on the to my connections on the Korean side and said, like, can you help me get beta access? I've already submitted, blah blah blah. Got into the beta. and then played it, and then just started really enjoying it. Um, so yeah, from the outset, I was like, when they finally start running tournaments for this, because they're 100% going to. There's such a, even though that TAC FPS isn't big in Korea, as a lot of people will say, there's a hell of a lot of TAC FPS style games that Koreans do play. They just don't play CS:GO. But this one's made by Riot, and League of Legends is the biggest game in the world, and also especially so in this country, where it nearly has almost 50% of the entire market in the PC bongs. So people are going to play this game because A, they will be curious, B, it's made by Riot, C, they'll probably enjoy it. Yeah, I was interested in it from the outset. And then eventually at the end of 2020, there was the First Strike tournament that was coming up, and they're like, okay, we're going to do kind of this, little minor online tournament series, and then it's going to conclude with a little LAN event that they held at LoL Park. So it was awesome because that was the first time I've gotten to work out of that studio because I had left before they built it. And yeah, it was just, myself, Wolf, we were the two most experienced people in Korea as far as FPS commentary was concerned. Brent, Valdez, he's done a fair amount of like Crossfire and things like that, so he is not a stranger whatsoever when it comes down to casting tech FPS. And then Paper Thin, who has been working on PUBG kind of since, I guess, 2017, 2018, I believe, was kind of like the next most qualified person for FPS. So we're like, okay, we have a core of 4 people, and this is what we need. It's a 4-day broadcast. Bing, bang, boom. The talent is slotted. We had our one analyst, Ending Life, who's one of the most tightly connected people that I know of when it comes down to knowing every single pro player and knowing their story, where they came from, whether they started as a streamer, yada, yada, yada. So he was on our mainstay on our analyst desk, and then we just kind of rotated off from there. So it was kind of just an assessment of who's done the most FPS stuff, who makes sense for this broadcast, and then we kind of move forward from there. And then obviously going into the actual VCT seasons at the beginning of 2021, with Valdez and Wolf doing LCK, they couldn't really dedicate any time to being able to do Valorant, so we needed to get some other people involved in that front. And going down the list, there's not too many other people in the country at all, but there's Tasteless and Artosis, who had a void to fill after the the whole ASL thing that happened. So
yeah, and now it's
so we had
Tasteless
them
and
for the first
Chopra.
season.
Yeah.
Yes, and then that all just continued to kind of shift around
Yeah,
over the
exactly.
seasons.
I mean, it just sounds like it made sense for a lot of you as far as the FPS factor goes. But then, how did you find your first person shooter experience really translated to a game like Valorant? It certainly has been explained as like a CS:GO with Overwatch features. So, do you agree with
Yeah.
that? Have you done any CS:GO watching or studying of how they cast before you went
Oh
into it, or
yes.
just okay? Yeah, can you explain that?
So so I was before like League of Legends was even a thing. CS like 1.6 and then Source was kind of like the first games that the first like real PC games that I really played, or at least like on the FPS front. Because like I said, I played Diablo 2, Warcraft 3 and whatnot. But as far as FPS goes, 1.6 Source, those were my kind of bread and butter. That and like UT2K4 back in those days. So I used to compete, in like the like one of the Cal brackets with my friends at a local land center. So we had a team, and we would go and we could compete, once a week or whatever in Cal, and in Source, and just see how much of a run we could make. But I never stopped playing CS:GO and whatnot. I haven't played it now for a little while, but at my peak, I don't even remember the name of the fucking ranks, but it was one higher than Desert Eagle or whatever. DGM or something like that. I don't know.
Sure.
Distinguished Master Guardian, DMG. I don't remember. Anyway, I was like in like the kind of upper echelons, not anywhere near global elite, but I guess more like a kind of like a diamond rated player in that regard, like a low diamond rated player. So like I've been a player of and have watched Counter-Strike for many, many years, and I'm grateful to know and be friends with a lot of people from that scene who are commentators and whatnot, and I've spent a fair amount of time with the guys who were on the Team Liquid team back in the day, like when Simple was playing in North America and whatnot. So like I'm a huge CS fan, and it's always kind of been my the game that I want to cast. and I've never really gotten the opportunity to do so. But Valorant has kind of brought me one step closer to that, I suppose. But I've watched an immense amount of these casters that I respect and love, like Semler, Anders, that duo when they're at their peak. You've got Moses, who's been doing always been incredible and whatnot. Yeah, I've seen a lot of their styles and kind of wanted to bring that slower pace in, because it is slightly slower pace than Overwatch, but there's still abilities and whatnot. So being able to keep up with the hectic action in Overwatch League very much helps when Valorant starts getting wild as well, because especially with the amount of mollies and smokes and everything that have been added to the game. Now you've got Fade, who's coming in with her haunts. You've got Caesars that she throws on the ground where she roots people in place and whatnot. There's a whole lot of shit to try to keep track of in a moment. So when a site exec is going through, you need to know what 3 to 10 different people are doing in that moment. And I think that Overwatch, being able to really see and understand what's going on every split second of that game, very much translates and helps me kind of break down and understand what's going on in Valorant. Every now and then you still make mistakes, you still slip up, but that's bound to happen with just about any game. But I that watching so much Counter-Strike and being able to kind of take that slower pace, get quiet, talk about when the players are creeping up in a position, might be able to go for a knife on somebody, and just like really slowing down the pace and I guess like silencing your tone a little bit more and like going almost to that whisper to really build the tension in the moment. That all came from just years of watching CS:GO.
I love CS:GO. I love watching it, and I think that they have some of the best commentators. And I think their game also, has a lot of great pacing moments, like you were just explaining there.
Yeah.
I can't really imagine Overwatch League doing so much of that like quiet whisper thing, because I mean, I'm sure there's some sneaky moments, but
It's few and far in between when it does
yeah,
occur, but there are moments like that. And once more, I do that same thing in those moments in the Overwatch League, just because I'm like, you got to build that tension, and that comes from oh, Simple's pushing Cat right now. They don't know that he's coming around from behind for the backstep, and you just dropped it down, and then you build up to that massive moment when he gets the kill or whatever, or when it falls apart, and
yeah. It kind of on that note, bringing in something from another esports, commentary or pacing. How much have you considered how much better your casting is because you've been able to branch out? Do you think that has contributed to your skill, or has it actually been something that you've really had to work around and has kind of been more of like a difficulty than I don't know, a booster?
I think I think at this point now that I've done multiple different esports across different genres, um, might need to do a second take of this one. Yeah. You want to just tee that question up for me one more time?
Sure, yeah.
I guess.
So, you've done a lot of different games. And from my own experience, I feel like doing different games has given me a lot more avenues of like freedom of expression, kind of the slower things, the faster things. I brought that back to my original game. Do you find yourself doing the same thing? Would you say that experimenting with different games made you a better commentator, or has it just been a difficult portion of your career?
Um, yeah, I think that it has made me better overall. I
Hmm.
think that being able to go branch out, do other titles, even ones that are within the same sphere as each other, like Overwatch, Valorant. Um, I think that doing them, it just kind of makes you think about approaching each game in a way that you might not have thought of, if you're only tunneled in on one. Like when I was doing League of Legends, I could have kept doing League of Legends and still been casting only League of Legends to this day, if things had worked out that way, if I didn't have the opportunities that came up. And maybe I'd be like so fucking incredibly good at League of Legends commentary, but I wouldn't necessarily have learned like the little nuances or change ups and styles that I've gone through now. And I think that being able to do a different game and say, like, I kind of like the way that I do this in Overwatch. I want to take that back and plug that into League or plug that into Valorant. I like the way that this goes across to the audience. I can't necessarily think about any examples off the top of my head. These would be very kind of like micro things, I guess. But
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I think that it would sound way different And maybe it would sound better if I didn't branch out to other games, but I personally believe that it would sound worse if I didn't have experience in other spheres.
Yeah, it's kind of impossible to, get the definitive answer, like, does it make you a better commentator? Because you won't
Yeah.
ever know what would happen if you just stuck with League of Legends. But I absolutely think that, whenever I do cast Valorant, I come back to StarCraft. I think so much more about like the tactics on the map. Like it is so much more
Mm.
about like positioning than if I had just been casting StarCraft the entire day. So I think that opens up another avenue. And I think it makes you sound like a more it allows you to bring in different angles to make you sound like a more unique commentator as well, because there's always that fear of just becoming kind of homogenous in your own little caster circle and own little esports circle. So I think so, but I'm perhaps also biased. You also mentioned that you acknowledge that you make some slip ups sometimes when the action gets really heated, and I just wanted to pick your brain as a play by play commentator
All
about
right.
how you've managed to kind of break things down. Did you ever find yourself as a growing play-by-play commentator kind of getting tripped up, trying to put too much information into the action? Where did you find your balance that makes you, the respected play-by-play you are today?
So I don't remember exactly when I kind of came to the conclusion, I guess, just like the decision. There was never really a conversation with myself where I was like, right, this is going to be my style. This is what I'm going for with my commentary. Um, I've just kind of always spoken quickly and been able to kind of just flow with the action, I guess. So like I do often go for rap god cast or whatever, that kind of shit. That just kind of naturally happened, but at some point I kind of made the decision that I wanted to have commentary that even if somebody wasn't watching the game, because there's people who maybe are super interested in a game, but they're driving to work, because they're on the East Coast and they're trying to drive to work or drive to college
Mm.
when the matches are happening over here in Korea. So they can only listen to it because it's dangerous to look at your phones while you're driving, so don't do it. So maybe they just have the audio on, but they need to be able to understand what's happening, because if I just play by play to the way that I had kind of like started out, it would just sound like a whole lot of nothing, and you wouldn't necessarily get any kind of idea as far as what's going on in the actual game. So I wanted to just kind of make it as visual for audio listeners as humanly possible, so that they could just hear it and get a rough understanding of where people are positioned in a game, what ults are being used, where the kills are happening at and whatnot, at any given moment. And I I think like the moment that I kind of realized that I was doing this was when I was at the grand finals for the 2019 Overwatch League season, and I had a group of people come up to me after the finals had ended, and they said like, "Oh, like we love your casting. There's times where I can't watch the games, or I have like my AirPods in when I'm at the gym, and I listen to your cast, and I can understand everything that's happening in the match without even having to see the game." And I was like, that's what I've been going for. Like I just kind of that revelation. I'm like, yeah, this is actually what I've been wanting to do. And finally I have like somebody just confirmed to me that it's working. And I'm like, awesome. Like I'm gonna keep trying to do that. So that's just kind of always been my drive. And especially approaching a new game, like going into Valorant for the first time at the end of 2020, getting over that initial hump of getting comfortable with the game as fast as possible allows me to get to that point where I feel like I can kind of very easily paint a picture for the audio listeners and whatnot, so they can fully
Mm.
understand things. So for Valorant, I was like trying to understand as much about the game as humanly possible, as quickly as possible, so that when I started casting it, I could very quickly get into that same form.
Do you ever have any of the criticism that you only look at what's on the screen? Um, and how do you deal with that?
Um, I mean, I think some people could say that. I've definitely had people try and say, especially like back in Overwatch, be like, "Oh, he's just sometimes it just feels like he's reading the kill feed," and I'm like, I know that it seems that way, and the kill feed can be a nice tool if something happens off screen and whatnot, but like widely, if I see something in the kill feed, I'll say that it happened off screen. I literally will say those words like off screen, this guy dies. Um, Everything else that I'm casting, it's all what I'm seeing with my eyes. Sometimes I'm looking at, I'll flip up to the mini map. One of the things that I actually wanted to do on this kind of similar point was those eye tracker webcams or whatever that you can get.
Yeah.
I wanted to get one of those and then show, where my eyes are going during these matches and whatnot, like especially for Overwatch and Valorant that are a lot more hectic, so that people could see like it's not the kill feed. It's not just the kill feed. It is entirely, it's everything that I'm seeing happen in the game, whether on the mini map or directly in front of my eyes, things that are happening off screen. Like my eyes are constantly going everywhere to try to take in as much information as humanly possible. I think I do a pretty good job of catching things. Sometimes when the chaos is too crazy, obviously you're not going to be able to catch everything. I'm not a mutant. I'm not superhuman. But I think for a mortal, I do a pretty decent job.
Yeah, I think so. And as a play-by-play commentator, do you ever get kind of perhaps frustrated? I don't know if you've even heard this criticism, but kind of alongside the you only look at the screen. You ever, kind of wish that you could throw in these like analytical points, especially in the faster games where you really can't be both?
Right. So this is a thing that I have. I think one of the biggest struggles that I've had is that because I do talk so quickly and I often talk so much um in my commentary, there are times where I will overstep and I do put out that those analytical points because these are games that, I understand. I like to joke as much as anybody else about how like, oh, the play by play is just the guy who yells and doesn't understand what's really going on. Um but I like to think that I have a pretty good grasp as far as, what's happening, what the stakes are at any given moment, how ult economy works, whether it's in Overwatch, Valorant, the actual weapon economy in Valorant. Like I think I have a pretty good understanding of these things. And there are times where I do want to put those comments in there, or I do put those comments in there. But then sometimes I will get feedback. And again, I'm happy to have that criticism come to me, especially directly from my co-caster, and they will say like, you were hitting these points like, that's exactly what I wanted to get at, and I feel like you were talking for a bit too long, so just kind of like, reel it in a little bit. I'm like, okay, no problem. And then I just, make a mental note of that I don't overextend, that I don't go for these analytical points that I should be handing over to my co-caster. Because ultimately, when you're a caster, your job is to not only entertain the audience and tell them what's going on, but to make your co-caster look good. So if I see that analytical point, I should trust my co-caster to be able to pick up on it. And, more often than not, when I leave it to them, they go ahead, they grab it, they look good. So that has been something that I struggle with because I do it too often rather than don't get to do it at all.
Okay. All right. Interesting. It's always fascinating to hear about these faster paced games where I think the split is a little bit more common, even though it's not, all the time.
Mhm.
There are some people who do, both rather fluidly. But, thinking of at any point in StarCraft where I would have been like, Roddy, you took all my points that I was going to say. It's a joke that we have is that Rotterdam will just
Hmm.
say like all the things you wanted to say on the desk. And you're just like, yeah, they played good. I look super smart now. But I would never really bring it up. Kind of like the expectation, I think, for um, us is that, you better have more points.
Hmm.
So if you
Go a
ever
little bit deeper.
yeah. You ever, kind of gotten into that, contest, or has it really always just been like, yeah, like this is my role. I'm reaching out too far.
um, I think within the cast itself, there hasn't been too much of an issue other than just like the occasional overstep, like I mentioned.
Hmm.
I've done desk work in the past. Like I was on the desk and casting at the Valorant Champions in Berlin last year, um, and you know, I'm fine to do analytical work, but I think that for me, being a part of a desk is more about the story line of the players and whatnot. So I'm more than happy to go into that, especially when it's about representatives from APAC, Korea, Japan, and whatnot. These regions that are in my time zone that I get to watch and keep track of and whatnot. I want to be the guy who goes out there and talks about Stacks and Termy, the coach for DRX, his history as a pro player in Counter Strike and whatnot, how he has this 15-year long career, whatever it is at this point. I want to bring those points rather than talking about the economy and talking about like the way that they did a site execution and whatnot. Like, I'm more than happy to leave those points. Like, if somebody wants to look super big brain about the game itself, I'm more than happy to have the other analysts just take all of that stuff. I want to explain to people like why it's so fucking cool that this guy is still playing, or why this guy is a coach now, and what makes him qualified for this position, and how that all works together for the team. Like, that's mostly what I like to focus on if I'm doing actual analytical work.
Mhm.
So I just concede. I don't have to worry about trying to fight back. I just say, like, you do as much big brain shit as you want. I'm just going to talk about storylines.
Yeah, nice. That's something that I think is underlying to every cast as well. I mean, the analysts who really do want to go big brain, you could just kind of call them like microscopic storylines. The
Mm,
the way that this build worked out to do this thing, to do that thing, is a story in and of itself. But then you can kind of go
right. Yeah.
macro. That is, this guy did this thing in his real life that then turns into this thing in the esport. So there's always a few more angles that you can get out there that are still important. But I know that for especially the play-by-play guy, kind of it is usually more tasked with that macro perspective. How do you keep that storyline strong throughout these very action-packed games? Because there's also not usually a lot of time before rounds, from what I've seen in like CS:GO or Valorant.
Um, Typically, there's a lot of stuff at the very top of the show. We've got a good amount of space to kind of plug those moments in, but um, it's just about gentle reminders, I guess, throughout. Like, if there's just a moment where it makes sense to just kind of like bring back up the storyline, um, then I guess you do that. Otherwise you can do it in the conclusion if it's like the first time that a team has ever beat another team, or whatever. It could be something as simple as that a player has his family in the audience for the first time. Production will sometimes like give that info over to us, um, and then it's just like we have to, we're going to mention that, when he does some crazy moment, like, with his parents in the audience, like, blah, 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 like, gets the ace, whatever it is. Just kind of just, I don't know, keeping it on the overall, what's the words I'm looking for here? The overall story of like what's happening, rather than just exclusively about what's in game. Bringing in the real world aspects of it as well, the previous careers that these guys have had, other games that they've competed in and whatnot. It's always worth mentioning.
Mhm.
Even in Overwatch, I find that to be the case as well. There's a lot of meta storylines going on in the Overwatch scene about players who used to play on other teams that are now playing against those teams, and they're getting revenge and whatnot, or players who have never won championships that are doing it. Hello, my cat is trying to jump up onto my desk. I know that. So yeah, I think it's just when you have a moment to just keep drilling that into the audience's ears, you just keep doing it.
Mhm.
So oftentimes, especially when I was working with Wolf in Overwatch, we would go over the storylines and whatnot. And widely, he was the one who took all of that at that time. But I've kind of carried the torch forward in pushing storylines in the histories of these Korean players now that they're in the Overwatch League, since he's doing the LCK now.
Yeah.
But we would have just conversations about it. What is the story that we want to tell with this? What are the points that we want to bring up? Um, and then I might make a reminder to it during the game, and then Wolf be like, yeah, like, he's never been able to beat this team, and now he's like just 2 minutes away from being able to do it if he can just close out this map, yada yada yada.
Mhm.
So
I, for my, you know, I
sorry,
suppose.
I'm just gonna open the door real quick. She's wanting to go out of
Sure.
the room.
Yeah, no
So
worries. I know cats.
okay, we'll leave that door open. Actually, it's fucking hot as hell in here.
Yeah, it's getting warm. So what I was gonna say is that from the time that I've watched, and this is limited compared to many other, things that I've watched, but you casting Valorant, I feel like there's a couple of things that you do well when it comes to story. One, I think you do sound like very much like a traditional sports broadcaster, in the sense that I know there's been some lulls, like your co-caster has stopped their analysis, and there's still a little time while everyone gets set up, and you kind of hit like bullet points almost, where you're like, remind the score,
Mm.
which is very traditional broadcaster, and then also like you usually do kind of fit in that story point, just a reminder, this team has not won in 8 years, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Um, And then I also think that generally what great play-by-play commentators do is they keep it for the they don't keep it. They push it in at the end as well. So whenever that big hype moment is coming in, it's the last round, it's the tied score, whatever it is, they'll be like, I don't know, in it, they'll say like, again, hasn't won in 8 years, and they're finally going to do it. And I think that you do that very well
Thank
as
you.
well. So I can just kind of be mushed in there. But I think you, more than others that I've noticed, do the beginning thing, the almost bullet point. So I don't know if you've picked up on you doing that, or this goes back to you just wanting to make sure that the audio listeners know what's going on.
I think it's kind of just a mix, I guess. Or if I just don't, if the my co-caster hasn't said something that like really demands a reply to it, and it's just
Hmm.
kind of like, they finish their statement and we're just waiting for the next round to start, then yeah, I think it just makes sense to kind of take stock and say, okay, going into this round, they have these guns, these ults are available, this is the score, blah 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 blah. The wins in this team sales, just kind of take a zoom out for a second. Like, this is the state of the game. You obviously don't want to do that at the beginning of every single round, or it just becomes the most redundant shit. It's just like, this guy only knows how to talk about like what guns they have and like, oh, this is the score. Like the most shallow information you could possibly give. But yeah, I mean, I think if you have like 4 or 5 rounds to go by, I think it helps. And I would say that probably for that whole like, you know called like baseball radio, I guess, is kind of the concept that I have in my head of, just listening to a game and you can understand like who's on what base,
Hmm.
how many bases this guy is going to get off this hit and whatnot. Um, I think, yeah, it probably does develop a little bit out of that whole concept, I suppose, but it was never really something that I guess it was at the forefront of my brain that I do.
Right. Another thing you just mentioned right there, which I'm starting to lose track of my own thoughts here, is it's still very early in the morning for me. Um, gonna
True.
require my own second take. Um, you said, oh shoot, what did you just say? So you just mentioned that when there's nothing that the co-caster said that requires a direct response. I thought that was kind of interesting because I think the expectation for anyone is that and the encouragement even for a lot of casting duos that it's very much a conversation. Like you are supposed to reply immediately afterwards. But I've also noticed that in certain times or more in a different esports, there is a lot more of that. Like someone stops and then the other person doesn't necessarily have to respond to that. Do you find that just to be like a natural flow thing? Like you just kind of realize like, yeah, I didn't need to respond to
Yeah.
that. It's better if I do something else. Or does that, think add any awkwardness to it?
No, I think it entirely comes down to who you're casting with, and there has to be a good degree of trust between the duo.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I've been fortunate enough to have that trust with basically every duo that I've ever worked with. Um, because most of the time the people that I'm casting with started off as being my friends, at least at this point. Um, so you kind of have a natural cadence. You're comfortable with each other. Having sitting in silence when you're out at a bar or whatever. And that can translate into when you go to a cast. Like, somebody can say something, you don't necessarily have to respond to it. And then you just move on to the next topic, or you talk about the thing that you want to talk about in the game. I think that it can also add a great deal of tension in moments. Cause like if Paper Thin sets up a big point and whatnot about the importance of this round and whatnot, like, it doesn't really add to the importance of it and the stakes of it by me just going like, you're absolutely right, and then putting whatever other ideas or bullshit that I have into it. Like, if he's done a good job of setting the stakes, I don't need to reply to it, and then I just leave it as it is, let it breathe for a moment, and then move on to the next part of the game as we continue on. That tension carries over. um but that's not, like, it's not a thing that's discussed. That's just a natural flow that is developed by working with people over an extended period of time, which is why having steady duos is great. And there's been a lot of back and forth between certain people and certain companies who constantly like to change up the casting duos and whatnot. But you don't get a Monty Doa, you don't get a Tasteosis, you know, without having um, those people cast together all the time.
Hmm.
So when you have an extended, especially when you have an extended casting team, in things like the LCS and whatnot, the Overwatch League, we had a fairly large team, but we kept people widely to their duos, which I think is great. There's a little bit of change ups out here, I guess, for the LCK, but it's the same four people who are working with each other every single day. And you either go from casting with this guy the one day or doing the desk with him the next day, and then you do a change every now and then, but everybody works together so frequently and is such good friends with each other that it doesn't really affect the product that much, I guess, for them. But yeah, I don't know, just having that consistency, it's everything.
I think that's all very good points, and it kind of even lines up with the idea of, there's a common initial advice to commentators, just like don't be afraid of silence.
Yeah.
Don't just say nothing, but don't be afraid of silence. It's almost like that. Don't be afraid of like not saying something. Giving that affirmation that you said, which is ultimately quite useless. Which is, yep, I agree. Yeah, 100%. Like those types of transitionary sentences are like they're not really necessary, but it doesn't feel, speaking from personal experience, I just feel like I kind of have to, and that might go with the fact that, yeah, we don't cast with the same person all the time. We're all very much friends with each other, but as far as building a particular pacing or conversational flow or whatever you want to say, yeah, we don't really get to do that. So absolutely, I see the benefit in duos. But as much as I would love to go into that, we do have to start wrapping up. It's been just over an hour. So
That
just
flew
one
by.
one last question. Yeah, well, when we talk about things that we really like, it tends to go by fast. So one last question. Question from Barrett. What is it like being part of the Bad Moon Talents? So you got picked up by an agency. How's that working out?
Ah, right. um Honestly, it's great. Initially, because working out here, doing the lion's share of my work in Korea for many many years, the need for an agent, just didn't really exist. Um, then the first time that I really ever kind of did approach an agent was when Wolf and I were doing our negotiations for the Overwatch League. I won't name who they were. It's definitely not Bad Moon, obviously. They weren't even a thing, but the agent that we hired, I don't think he did a very good job. And in the end, Wolf and I basically just negotiated around him and then managed to get ourselves
Mhm.
increases that where he could not. So that kind of put a bad taste in my mouth for working with agents for several more years. And I just felt like, do I want to do this? I've done so many negotiations for myself at this point. They've typically gone really well. Do I want to give somebody a percentage of my income to handle this stuff for me? And it finally hit a point where I said, you know what, I'm going to do it. There were some things during the off season, that were occurring with both Valorant, Overwatch League, etc. Um, I was in Berlin, received my offer for Overwatch League, and I was just like, I just cannot be fucked to worry about this right now. So I immediately got on a call with Andrew Drake, who is the CEO and head of talent at Bad Moon, because he was the guy who actually I negotiated with uh, at Activision Blizzard, one of the ones that I negotiated with um, when I first got hired. So I was like, this guy knows the ins and outs of the company. He's got nothing but fantastic feedback from my other colleagues who are under him, such as Uber and whatnot. Avril is under him as well. So my co-caster in the Overwatch League is also signed to the same agency, which also makes it really convenient for doing joint stuff between the two of us. Um, and it's been such a weight off my shoulders. Just having them come to me when like there's an offer or when they say like we got this thing but we're gonna fight it or whatever it could be, is so much better than having everything funneled directly to me and only dealt with by me.
Mhm.
I found myself experiencing like just an immense amount of stress over the last 2 years. I had panic attacks at times. I was like, I've never had fucking panic attacks in my life. Like I've never suffered from anxiety, nothing. And then there was just so much shit going on that it started really getting to me. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to hire somebody else to deal with it. And it has been one of the best decisions that I have made in my career. So for anybody who's kind of on the fence about it, um, it's definitely not for everybody, obviously, but I think that if you get stressed out about those types of situations where it's like, oh my god, I have like 5 emails to respond to because I got offers for this stuff and I got to try to negotiate all of this shit, and it starts getting overwhelming, just hire an agency. Hire an agency. Bad Moon is excellent. Um, if they have openings to take on more people, I would highly recommend it because they are just the angels. They're my angels right now.
That's awesome. I think that when I've asked about agencies before, there pretty much are like two camps, right, of people who have them, which is that one, I am blessed to not deal with this bullshit, basically,
Yeah,
which I am very understanding of, especially when negotiations do get stupid. Or
which they often
they,
do.
yeah, yeah, or they're very appreciative of course, the amount of contacts and work that they can get. But then there's this whole other discussion of like this weird like hierarchy, and do they feel like they're really being paid attention to and whatnot. But one thing's for certain, people love the bookkeeping side, like the to just deal with it for me.
Yep.
I think I've heard pretty much good reviews as far as agencies for that particular purpose. So I can certainly see the temptation sometimes, and I'm glad it worked out so well for you, and that they seem like an awesome company.
Yep. I no complaints whatsoever.
Nice. All right. So that is going to be it for the podcast. As I said, it's going to be released in like 2 weeks. So,
Cool.
where are you going to be? What are you going to be doing? What games is going to be casting?
2 weeks from now? Oh, what the fuck? Let's see. What's in 2 weeks? So when this releases, I'll be in Guam, chilling out on the beach, sipping Mai Tais or some shit like that, I guess.
Nice.
But I'll also be doing the Overwatch League. We've got, by the time this comes out, the mid-season tournament will have concluded, and I'll have cast that, and hopefully people tuned in and enjoyed that. Otherwise, there's some more Valorant on the horizon with the last chance qualifier for East Asia. We've got 3 teams from Korea, Japan, and then 2 teams from China, which are going to be competing for the first time in international competition. So if anybody's interested in seeing how China is going to be playing this game, they should check that out. And from everything that I've seen from China, it is batshit crazy, fast paced, like nonsensical action. So it's going to be definitely entertaining to watch. But yeah, I've got that stuff on the horizon, and then that's about it.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you. And thank you guys for watching. As a reminder, there's a Patreon, patreon.com/zombiegrub. Thank you to Shayne for helping to co-produce the podcast, and Barrett to reach out and help coordinate and all that good stuff. And for the people that support on the Patreon, Nick, Vinny, Steven, ET, Ravi, and CuddleBunny, going a bit above and beyond. Thank you guys very much. So I will see you back here for another episode of Caster Calls with our next commentator guest in 2 weeks. Bye, guys.